The division into three types of humanity reflects three different ways of responding to a fundamental problem of the human psyche, which is the problem of anxiety. The disturbance of waking sleep recognition by the brain only seemingly does not seem to have any connection with the anxiety problem. Because here, the anxiety turns out to be the causative factor too, namely, an anomaly related to anxiety can lead to a disturbed sleep recognition by the brain. What anomaly of anxiety, then, and how can be responsible for the appearance of the polysymbolicity, of the simultaneous polysymbolicity of the psyche? As we know, the phenomenon of anxiety concerns only the waking state. So the anxiety is only present when you are awake. Under physiological conditions, it stops when you fall asleep and appears when you wake up. Note that SSPM, sleepy symbolic psychemi, is not the same type of psychosis as SPM, symbolic psychemi, because SSPM does not have to perform any anxiolytic role in the sleep as the case of the SPM while awake is. So SSPM is a type of a parapsychosis and not a true psychosis, because real psychosis is always an anti-anxiety tool of the psyche. Since there is no anxiety in a sleep dream, there cannot be any psychosis in a dream then. SSPM, sleepy symbolic psychemi, is an expression of the brain-free creativity and is produced by SBM, symbolic brain-me, in order to exert the symbolic skills of the brain even in sleep. Now let's note what happens when the human psyche is awake, but there is no anxiety. Well, I repeat, what happens when the human psyche is awake, but there is no anxiety? Well, it's a situation analogous to the one in which the psyche is in a sleep dream. Namely, in the absence of the anxiety, the only symbolic me that may appear is SSPM, sleepy symbolic psychemi. Since it doesn't happen in a dream, but while awake, then the SSPM will not be created, but its analog while awake, that's PSPM, parallel symbolic psychemi. Here is how the polysymbolicity, spontaneous polysymbolicity of the psyche can be explained. In other words, the intermediate cause of the PSPM, parallel symbolic psychemi, is the brain failure to distinguish the waking from sleep period, but the primary and actual cause is the waking anxiety phenomenon. How is that some people's brains can emit an anxiety wave discontinuously? Let's be honest, it's not that unusual. After all, this is only an intermediate option for the functioning of the brain between the anxiety present in the waking hours and the anxiety absent in sleep. In the intermediate option, we deal with intermittent anxiety while awake, present and disappearing, just like after falling asleep. In order to become intermittent, the anxiety as a purely physiological phenomenon must undergo the process of genetic information, which will describe the type of interruption in the emission of the anxiety wave. Thus, intermittent anxiety, and consequently also the polysymbolicity of the psyche, simultaneous polysymbolicity of the psyche, schizophrenia, known so far, must be to a considerable extent determined genetically. The parallel polysymbolicity of the psyche, so-called schizophrenia, turns out to be nothing but a daydream, and the PSPM, parallel symbolic psyche, is simply an awake SSPM, sleepy symbolic psyche. Actually, it's not difficult to notice some significant phenomena related to anxiety in people suffering from the simultaneous polysymbolicity of the psyche. The first observation is, for reasons so far unknown, the parallel polysymbolicity of the psyche, schizophrenia, does not manifest until the end of adolescence. How does this relate to anxiety? Well, as I wrote before, and as I said before, in childhood, the primary psychosis is a comfortable and sufficient protection against anxiety. Let's not be deceived. This anxiety is there all the time. But psychosis, in this case, the primary psychosis, prevents the anxiety from accessing the child's consciousness. Consequently, the child's consciousness develops without the harmful, continual anxiety. But I repeat, this anxiety, although covered by the psychosis, is still present by most of the children. I say most of the children. That's it. By some children, the anxiety does not manifest. And this is not because this anxiety is covered by the primary psychosis, but this anxiety does not manifest because it's not there. Of course, it cannot be that the anxiety is completely absent, because only fully autistic children are completely deprived of the anxiety. Even children with autistic streak have the anxiety. Meanwhile, there are children in whom the anxiety is generated discontinuously by the brain. And that's why the brain starts to get confused in recognizing the waking and sleeping periods, because brain considers the end of waking period as the pre-sleep extinction of the anxiety wave. Only then the human brain knows that it's the time to start sleep dreaming and to activate an anxiety-free SSPM, sleepy symbolic psyche, to continue practicing symbolic communication between SBM and SSPM. In the children with intermittent anxiety, while awake, there are anxiety-free periods, which the brain mistakenly treats as entering in the sleep period, and as a result activates sleepy symbolic psyche, SSPM. However, since everything takes place actually while awake, we are dealing with the analog of the SSPM while awake. That's the PSPM, parallel symbolic psyche. We see it soon.